Okay, welcome everyone. We are at the 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time session titled A Community Developed BibFrame Profile for the Description of Rare Books. We are joined by a group of presenters, including Christine DeZeller-Tideman at the University of Minnesota Libraries, Paloma Gracioni Picardo at the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas at Austin, Brittany Washington, also from the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas, Austin, Zoe Dobbs from the Beinecke Rare Books and Manuscripts Library at Yale University, Mara Kalin from the Beinecke Rare Books and Manuscripts Library at Yale University as well. Just a friendly reminder about the links, which will be shared in the chat shortly. And please remember to submit your questions and comments in Slack, and we will respond to them during the session. Thanks so much, and I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over. Oops.
I'm starting.
Oops. How do I stop this? Stop share. Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us. We have scheduled a lot of time for this, and what we are hoping is to really have a conversation and a lot of interaction, if possible. So we're going to start out by presenting some information, and but hope to move on to an ongoing collaboration and discussion, because that's really what this project is all about. So I will go ahead and start sharing my slides. So yes, so this is a community developed BibFrame profile for the description of rare materials. And so the folks who worked on this, which includes those of us who are involved in today's program, are all members of the ALDI for Rare Materials Affinity Group. Okay, yes, there is a little delay in my slide moving. Okay, so our just overview of our agenda. I'm going to start out with a little bit of background of the project, but we won't go into full depth in the interest of time. We're going to talk about our process for developing this profile, and then Brittany is going to do a demo of our Sinopia profiles as they exist right now. Paloma is also going to show us a visualization for those of you who like to see things in more of a graph format, and then we will let you know about different ways to give feedback, not just in this presentation, but following the presentation if you need time to explore a little bit more. And think through things, experiment, and so on. It will be an ongoing opportunity for you to provide feedback and perhaps even get involved. We do have a number of prepared discussion questions, things that we had come up with in our profile development that we were just not sure about, either if we were interpreting our various ontologies correctly, or places there are inconsistencies perhaps, or just different options for modeling, and we weren't sure where the community might feel would work the best. And then if we have time, then we will also allow some time for open Q&A, just anything about the project, additional questions that we didn't pose. So that is our agenda here today. Okay, so the background, so probably going to refer to the Rare Materials Affinity Group as RMAG. And so one of our goals for this year was to develop a proof of concept BibFrame profile for rare books description. We decided to do this on the Sinopia platform, primarily because most of us came out of the LD4P2 project, so we were all familiar with that platform and had already worked in it. That was really the primary reason we chose to go that route. But we also really wanted to incorporate the Art and Rare Materials Ontology Extension, or ARM version 1.0, because that was specifically designed for working with rare materials and providing more granularity of different types of description and discovery ultimately. And so we wanted to see how does that work in a, in an actual linked data environment. So if you want more information about RMAGs, particularly how, when we meet, how often we meet, what we do, who we are, all of that, we do have a GitHub page that has all that information. We also have a Google Group list that you can subscribe to, and we welcome anybody who's interested to subscribe to that. We also have an affinity group meeting at LE4 this week on Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And we will very likely, it's not a real set agenda. It's just an open meeting for people to come and talk, but maybe then we may have continuing discussion of this project, or if people have additional questions or want to talk about it, but any other topic related as well. Okay, so our process to developing this profile was we sent out a survey about a year ago to a variety of lists, including our own list. We sent it to the descriptive cataloging for rare materials list, the BIBFRAME list, and additional LD4 lists. And then we formed a subgroup of the overall RMAG of folks that were particularly interested in working on this profile. We next had to determine our basis for modeling. And here I have listed, but I'm going to talk more in depth about all of those in a couple of slides. But that was, of course, an essential starting point for us. Really important that we don't do this in isolation, that we really coordinate with other people in the rare materials descriptive space. So we have a very, we'll say, parallel or overlapping working relationship for the ACRL Rare Books and Manuscripts Section Bibliographic Standards Committee, which has a linked data steering group, which perhaps has 100% overlap with our profiles group, perhaps. So we really are working together on this, and because that committee is also just very interested in exploring linked data for rare materials. So we just wanted to make sure we're working in step. Pretty quickly, we decided to focus on the item template because so much of what we do in rare materials description has to do with, and a lot of the ARM ontology classes and properties really have to do with item level things such as donors, former owners, custodial history, custom bindings, autographs, all of those types of things that really pertain to the copy in hand and not so much at the work or instance level. And and then just broader community engagement, and that includes what we're doing right now, as well as the European BIBFRAME workshop. We just found out that we are on the program for that meeting in September. It is only a half-an-hour program, so it will not be as all in depth as this one, but it will be a continuation of this conversation. A little more about what we found from our survey. We got 61 responses. Of those people that responded, 90% of them work with rare books, but there were significant percentages of people who also had cataloged other formats, including archives, maps, graphics, manuscripts. And I think that's just the nature of a lot of us who work in special collections cataloging, that we don't catalog just one thing. We have all kinds of different things that we catalog, and that's all part of our work. But rare books was definitely the most common thread among the responses. Most of those people indicated that they use RDA and DCRM, but around half still use AACR2, and that is most likely because the descriptive cataloging of rare materials is based in AACR2, so that's reflected there. We'll talk a little bit more about the RDA version of DCRM in a minute, but the version that most are still using is based on AACR2. And then we asked about some of the ARM classes and where there might be the most interest among this community to incorporate into a rare books data profile. And those included markings, citations, item history, pagination, and foliation, physical condition, and signature statements. Those are the classes that had the most interest. But there certainly, as far as creating other more targeted, more specific templates in the future, there was interest in artist books, intunables, manuscripts, both pre-modern and modern, Sammelbonds, graphics, and archival collection. Those things are had, there was interest in those as well. And I should say, just to acknowledge that the art and rare materials ontology, art is in there for a reason. It is really meant to be, it covers not only rare books and manuscripts, but also archival materials, art objects, museum objects, and so on. So it was written to have that broad audience, but just for the purposes of starting somewhere. That is why we focused on the areas of description that were most relevant for rare books, but we are not ignoring the fact that ARM has a broader audience and purpose. Okay, so here we're talking a bit about the different standards and platforms that we are working with. As I said, Sinopia, which is the linked data data platform that was developed as part of the LD4P project. Again, we chose it because that was what we were all the most familiar with. Always we have the discussion of whether we're going to base it on BIBFRAME or RDA. Even though Sinopia is largely built on BIBFRAME, it certainly can be used with RDA. The University of Washington has developed templates for their use that incorporate RDA. So that is certainly a valid option. But I mean, a lot of what we chose was we wanted to build on work that had already been done and what the folks that working on it were the most familiar with, just because we didn't want to start from scratch. So we just decided on BIBFRAME, and that also the PCC templates that were developed, the program for cooperative cataloging templates in Sinopia for books is what we kind of our starting point, and then we built on top of a lot of that framework. Let's see, I already mentioned ARM 1.0. That was developed, the first version of ARM was developed in an earlier iteration of LD4P, and then following that, there was a task force that created the current version. Okay, so DCRMR is the descriptive cataloging of rare materials RDA edition. So it is pretty new. It's great. It's a free online tool, and it incorporates official RDA, but it is but it's specific for rare materials. And at this point, how we have incorporated it into our templates, for the most part, where you will see it once we get to the demo, is in the as each descriptive area, as you're working through your template. There is an information link, and where appropriate, you can click on that link. It will tell you what the DCRMR rule is that's relevant to that, and you can link directly to that resource to get more information. So, and as I already mentioned, we coordinate all of this work with our BMS, the Graphic Standards Committee. Then a little more about our process as a working group. Initially, we met monthly. As we got closer and closer to LE4, we figured out, oh, we better meet more often. So we have something to show that's more or less a viable proof of concept. And then our various members of the group would volunteer to create Sinopia resource templates for individual ARM classes. And then we'd come back together, review what we've done in this group, as a group, discuss, identify questions or areas needing further input, which we put into a spreadsheet, which seeded the questions, some of the questions we're going to be asking today. And we just kept, tracking all our work. Then once each element was reviewed, we incorporate those into our overall RMA item profile. And certainly some of these elements we discovered do belong at the instance level. or perhaps both instance and item. Our focus to this point has been on the item. With that, I think that is the conclusion of the intro portion, and Brittany is going to do a demo. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, so I'm going to guide you through the item profile. And we're just going to start from the top and go down. Excuse me. So first up, we have held by. That's a lookup using the LC Cultural Heritage Organization. I want to try something. Okay, I'm going to quickly open up my video. Christine, will you nod your head yes if you see this little squiggle in green that I just did on the screen? Okay, cool. All right, good. Because I want to be able to point to things, and me pointing at the screen, y'all can't see that. So I wanted to make sure that that actually works. All right. Oh no, it stays. Okay, well, I'll work on this while I'm talking about shelving call number. This one's pretty clear. It's for call numbers, and we have 3 different options here where you can use local and LC call numbers and NLM call numbers, just depending on your favorite call number schema or whatever your institution uses. And then we have held in sublocation. So this is a BIBFRAME property. An example of how this one might be used is for the Ransom Center, we have a lot of discrete locations. So for us, we would put our discrete locations here. And then I think you could also probably consider this one if you use a holdings record, your 852. For us, it's the delimiter C and ALMA, that information. So kind of discrete locations is a possible way you could use that one, but it is a literal. And then we have barcode, which I think is also another self-explanatory one. Electronic location. So just as a reminder, this is the item profile. So this would be linking the digitized version of the object itself that is being described. And then we have enumeration and chronology of item. This is specific to serials, so we're going to skip it. But it can also be used for multi-part monographs, but let's just run quickly past it. Okay, so now we're at lending, reproduction, and retention. This one, I believe, is another one that's pretty self-explanatory. They're all literals. It's where you can record your institution's policies regarding access and use. And scrolling down, here we have a contributor to item. So this one is just kind of that general contributor element. We have a more granular way of recording this information as well in this profile, but we just want to have this in here as just another potential way. And then scrolling down, item of, this is where you would record the link to your instance using the URI or to your manifestation. And then Christine had mentioned these little I links here. This, you just click on it and it'll kind of give you some information. So that this is what I just said, but in other times it's going to be the DCRMR rule. All right, continuing forward, we have item, pagination, and foliation. This is here in item because with rare books, we record this information in a much more granular way. And we want to know if, say, leaves are missing from the object or added in, or other kind of potential realities of describing rare materials, and the item, the pagination and foliation may be slightly different from how the manifestation presents itself. Okay. Now we have signature statement. This refers specifically to the item again. Some people may want to record this in the item to show differences in state or addition, but the signature is regularly thought of as an element of the manifestation. But we have it here in item just in case it is relevant to someone who is cataloging. And then we've got measurements. This is another one that's in the item and it's relevant for rare books because of the irregularities that result from binding books, for example. But there are many other ways that that an object can be unusually sliced and diced, I'll say. So as you can see, it's pretty granular, and you can't see yet because I haven't clicked on it. Now you can see that it's pretty granular. We have the value along, so this is like, say it's like 22 centimeters or whatever, that's where that would go. The measurement unit is where you'd put the actual centimeters. I won't actually do the lookup because it always fails when I'm trying to do it live. But this is where you'd put the measurement unit, and then the dimensions that you are measuring. So that's like the height, for example, that you would put there, and that's also a lookup. And we're currently using the Getty physical attributes and properties for that. And then we have physical presentation. This is a literal, however, no, wrong part. This is a literal. That can be like if it's folded or unfolded. Oh, I did want to say this. Okay, there is a vocabulary for that in the art and rare materials ontology. So that's just something to keep in mind. Add source. The source is that's referring to where you got the information, and this can be relevant for like duration type properties, which are often taken from the container itself. So that's where you can record that. And then we have note on measurement, and that's just a general note. And then we've got description here. I gotta click the little I because I actually forgot what this is for. Oh yeah, okay, so description and qualified measurement, the one that's down below, those are kind of similar. They're sort of doing the same job here. All right, moving on. And then description, that's just your free text, where you can add some more contextual information if you need to. And then there's note, which would be the note on dimension, a manifest, well, on item actually, but okay, let's move on. We're doing enclosure now. This one's a little complicated, but not too bad. So with enclosure, you can use this to describe the binding, or you can use it to describe some other type of enclosure. It just depends on if you click our little button or not. So I'm going to pretty much refer to these as though you were describing a binding, because that's what I'm most familiar with. That's what I usually am describing. But just remember that this can be used for any type of enclosure. So the description, that's where you add your free text description. And then type here, we've got using Legatus or Getty AAT. That would link, maybe like you could describe like a quarter binding, say for example, if you're describing binding or something like that. And then enclosure components, ooh, I'm highlighted, okay. Enclosure components relates to what the enclosure is made out of, and that's another lookup where you can use Getty or Legatus. And then we've got material, and material relates to Okay, I always struggle when I'm trying to describe this, but I'm just going to say what I wrote again, even though at this moment it doesn't quite make sense to me. Material is where you can record what the components are made out of. So like here is where you would put calfskin or parchment. I do get a little flustered at the material and the enclosure components part, but I think that's because I'm always thinking about binding. So for me, the material would kind of be what I would want to record, but there's also enclosure components should that be a factor in how you're describing the object. All right, so physical condition, that's a lookup in Getty. Let's click on it here just to show you. And then you can also add additional contextual description there. All right, so moving on from that, we have contribution. And that's if we know who made the enclosure or binding, and we can kind of click through the optional classes depending on if it's person, organization, etc., and then add the agent. And this is your basic lookup. I'm sure by now you have seen this. This is where you would put the name and it would come up in Library of Congress from the Library of Congress lookup. And then you can also record the relationship designator using the mark relator term. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna breeze past marking because we're gonna spend a lot more time on it here in a minute, but if there are markings on the enclosure, this is where you would record that information. We're going straight past it though, just for now. And then note, dimensions, and title. This is all for if there is a note that you want to record, dimensions for the enclosure, and then title for the enclosure. Because that's another thing that we often will record as rare book catalogers. Oh man, I didn't mean it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about markings. And this is the thing that I had just very quickly walked past. Because there can be markings on enclosures, but this is for markings on the object or the text block outside of the enclosure. So you can choose from this list here these optional classes for your variety of markings: annotation, autograph, binder's ticket, book plate, inscription, label, marginalia, seal, stamp, watermark. And then you'll record the value. What is meant by value right here is that you record what the marking is. So like the transcription of the inscription, for example, that's what value means in this context. And then you can do the contributor here, and that's for the name, if you know the name of the person who supplied the marking. And so this, I should have pointed this out a little earlier too, with the contributor for the enclosure, but this and a few other places, I think that's where that generic contributor element we have way up above becomes kind of maybe a little redundant or not totally necessary, because most of the contributors are going to be related to something like enclosure or marking or item history even, which is a little sneak peek for the next thing. Okay, and then description, that's just your free text describing the marking. So moving on to item history. We have more optional classes, conservation, custodial, and exhibition history. And we add an event. All right, so the event type, that's a literal, but we currently use the ARM, Art and Rare Materials Ontology, custodial history classes from version 0.1. This vocabulary has technically been deprecated, but it works really well for our purposes, so we're using it. Okay, and then the event agent, this is where you would add your creator, contributor, and the relationship designator. We've gone over that a few times, so I'll move past it. And then the event date, that is using the EDTF event date. So And then you can add event place and note on event, and then event output. That's where you can link to describe a resource such as an exhibition catalog or an assessment report. Okay. And here we have a source of acquisition. This one's pretty straightforward. Moving. Custodial history of item. So this duplicates item history a little bit. We've left that here as another example of the difference between ARM and BIBFRAME, just to give you an idea kind of the options. And also just to kind of see from your response how the community may prefer things to look and to be set up. All right, next up we have bibliographic citation. That is for citing bibliographies that describe your specific object. So this is for item bibliographic citation. This is another thing that would be also found in the instance of manifestation. So we are using the RBMS standard citation guidelines. So here is where we would record the standard citation form. That's for like pasting that from the RBMS standard citations into. And then we have the URL where we link to the standard citation, RBMS standard citation form website. And then we have the contained in manifestation. So this is where you would record the URI for the manifestation of the bibliography that you are citing. So let's say we're cataloging an item. I've done this a lot. It's been recorded in the Pforzheimer Library Catalog. That library catalog is describing the same exact object that I have in my library. So that's why I'm using it to cite in the item. I would put the manifestation for the Pforzheimer Library, the URI right here. And what's nice, if you don't know this already, there was a project that Yale did adding many of the titles from the RBMS standard citation forms to Wikidata. So we can actually use that data here. It's great. We don't have to kind of redo that here. And then in structured citation entry, this is where you would record like the volume or the citation entry and the page number. So right now we have, volume number, and then we have entry identifier. Yeah, this is where like the entry would go, and then you could also record the page number from that entry. And then below that, we have, so say it's just a page number, you can have the page number and then the volume if it's a multi-volume set. And then you can record a note. All right, and then we have just the note on item. I don't have much to say about that. And neither does our little information box. And then we have physical condition. And this is for describing the item as a whole, should you record that data. So there's that condition value. We've kind of seen this already with the Getty physical attributes and conditions effects. And then there is a space for your free text description of the physical condition. And that's it for the walkthrough. So I will stop sharing now.
Well, I guess it's my turn now, so I'm going to share my screen. I need to find what I need to share. So can you guys see a community feedback slide?
No, we cannot.
No, we can't see
Not
it.
yet. Don't say that. Okay. What about now?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so Thanks, Brittany, because that was a very, very useful walkthrough, and that's going to inform the rest of the session. But before starting with the discussion part, I'm just going to give some information about how to access the templates and how are we looking forward to get some community feedback. So the templates are openly available for testing by the community with the caveat that they are still a work in process. They are currently hosted in Sinopia Stage. Sinopia Stage is the Sinopia environment built for experimentation. So you don't have to worry about creating dummy data or messing things up. But to access the templates, you will need to have a Sinopia Stage account. And everyone can get a free Sinopia account. I'm not going to get into details here on how to do it, but you can find more information on the Rare Materials Affinity Group repository of the LD for GitHub. And I believe that links for this have already been shared in Slack and in the chat. The GitHub page also has direct links to the templates and more details. And we have not uploaded the RDF templates yet into GitHub, still working on them, but the Sinopia user interface allows you to see the underlying RDF for those of you that are interested in looking what's happening behind the scenes. We are very interested in getting feedback from the rare materials cataloging community. We have created a very basic form, and the link of the form is in the slide that will be available, but it is also on the ERMAG Profiles GitHub page. We welcome any type of feedback, regardless of your comfort level with linked data or BIBFRAME. The goal is to make sure that these templates are usable by the community. If field labels are confusing or the remarks don't provide appropriate guidelines, we would like to hear about it. If you are testing the form and you don't feel confident on how you should fill out a specific field, we would like to hear about it as well. If you consider that we are making a mistake, we have made a terrible modeling decision that is going to have interoperability repercussions down the line, please let us know. So the form is anonymous. Again, you can find the link to this form on the on our GitHub page, and I'm just going to show it here on the screen pretty quick. It's very simple, open questions, and we will really, really appreciate to hear from you guys. Where else? We are also keeping a list of standing modeling questions. Let me just go back to the slide. And those are also documented on our GitHub repository. The goal of today's working session is to facilitate a discussion to get around most of those modeling questions. But before getting started, I would like to open the floor for questions on what you have seen so far before we get the discussion started. So and Mara have been actively following up Slack. Do you guys have anything, or if anybody wants to ask a question here live, please raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Hi, Paloma. There have been 2 questions so far in Slack. The first one is from Kate Bowers. Items, all the examples relate to the objectness of the object being cataloged. Is there a way to associate the item with a historical event or topic? To be clear, this is not the topic of the text of the book, but if the object had a role in an event, for example, a copy of a book marked up in relation to desegregation.
That's a very interesting question. Does anybody want to answer that one, or do you guys want me to give it a shot? Anyone that has an idea so far?
I could hazard a guess. We do have an item history class that it can be subclassed as something like custodial history, etc. But you can also use a generic item history, and I'm thinking there might be a way to use a kind of a generic item history property and just have an event with the related event. We also had some thoughts about like how do we want to type these events, right? So this is also something to consider when we think about vocabularies for events, because there might be specific vocabularies for like a custodial history event. But if we want to open up that vocabulary to something more broad or generic, so that is actually a really good question and a good consideration for us going forward. I don't know what other folks' thoughts are.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, Kate. And I'm just showing on the screen now a visualization of the graph for the item based on the templates that we have developed. So you can see here what Zoe was talking about. We have a resource that is an item that has has an item history, and the item history is made up of different events, and then one of the properties of the event is going to be an event type, and we are going to talk more about that on the discussion. So this was a great question. And you say, Mara, there was another one?
Yes, there was. So Laura Ackerman asked, has there been work on making linked data created using the RMAG profile backward convertible to Mark 21?
Not yet. But that's, again, a great suggestion. And that's something that this group is actually very mindful of, because all the efforts that are currently happening are very BIBFRAME based, like the pipelines between Mark and BIBFRAME back and forth. And one of the, I will say that one of the factors that will make this like a sustainable and feasible approach for the description of rare materials would be that we also have those pipelines in place. So down the line.
I'll just add to that, especially since this is dealing with, at least right now, we are working with the item records specifically. That also would introduce complications in any mapping, because I think many institutions have their own idiosyncratic ways of including item level information, and it is often at the level of the bibliographic record and not at the level of the item. So again, I think any mapping would also have to be easily customizable by the institution using the mapping, because some folks will use 590s, some folks will use custom like 6XX fields. So I think that would have to be considered in any mapping that is developed.
We have a hand in the chat for Crystal.
Yeah, so these are like really rich item profiles or resource templates, and they're super cool. And I'm wondering, you might not have an answer to this, whether the discovery layer, when we're looking at BIBFRAME records, as catalogers, or when researchers are looking at BIBFRAME records, will item records be, or item description sets be visible to institutions that don't hold that item? Or are we only sharing instance descriptions? Because I think that a lot of this item information will be interesting to researchers of rare books and catalogers of rare books to see, you know, what does this other library's copy have inscribed on it, or do they have a more complete copy than my library? Do you know?
I'll jump and say, yeah, I'll let someone else say too, is because my answer is we don't know, but it's an excellent question, and is definitely, as we go forward, have to consider what is the value of doing this work. It's all, and I think we all know that often with linked data, we're still the discovery end of it is still an open question in a lot of cases, and so how this will play into it, and more of an aggregated ability to query and discover this information will be needed to make it take full advantage of it.
I was just going to also add that it probably will take some negotiation with vendors that develop those discovery layers. And right now, we have to struggle sometimes with the discovery layers that we have right now for MARC, because there's many MARC fields that are very relevant for rare materials that are not like indexed by default. And so I'm just thinking about the 510 was like a huge conversation with our systems team to like, yes, we need that to be searchable, we need that to display. So it just seems that this is just going to be continuing that conversation. If we have the proof of concept profiles that we can share and they get used, then we have a business case to have those developments include things that the functionality to show item information and not just instance.
Yeah, I just put a little rant in Slack. This is something, you know, we continually have to push for, you know, and we'll have to push our discovery layers as well, whoever they are, you know, don't forget about us. Item level metadata is important, you know, not, as you say, Crystal, not just at the individual institution level, but often across institutions. So, yeah.
Yes, we have some broad support in the chat. Index all the fields, says Kate. We have reached the end of the chat questions for now. Does anyone want to unmute and ask any before we move on?
Well, I'll take that as a no. So I'm just going to move on because now is when the fun part of the session starts. We are going to be getting deep in the weeds of data modeling discussion. Again, we have already done it, so feel free to address questions in Slack, raise your hand if you want to unmute yourself. We are going to be throwing a number of questions your way and give you like a few minutes to think about it, hear your thoughts. These are questions that we have been struggling with, and we really would appreciate to have some community feedback. So question number one, and Brittany have already introduced this one. Contribution, it's currently being described within the context of different resource templates. So we have markings has a contributor, which will be, for example, the role of the inscriber. Item history have also a contributor at the event level, which could be, for instance, a former owner. The enclosure has a contribution as well, binder, for instance. So is there a use case for a generic contribution at the item level, or are those all the possible use cases that we can think representing in markings, item history, and enclosure. And I'm going to let people think for a little bit and see what comes out of this. And I see, Zoe, that you have linked on Slack the item visualization on Miro. Thank you so much. So I don't think that people need to log in. This is like a view only. So feel free to like play around, because we have some questions, but you might have some questions too. So we will also be taking questions from the audience at the end.
And I, not to insert myself too much into what the feedback that we want to get, but I think part of, as you've seen through the demo, the way we've modeled things is very, very layered. But we recognize that not every institution maybe wants to get that far into things. And so, providing options more at a less granular level where people can add the information more at just a flatter, flatter level might be something that works for some institutions where they're not going to dig into identifying what type of contribution something is and just wanting to add in notes as they're used to doing now.
We have a comment from Kate Bowers. My instinct is generic or other should always be allowed for in surveys, for example, but I can't come up with a use case on the fly.
That was our instinct too, so that's why we we left it there. We just hope that it's not confusing, that you have that more granular description and then you have like this generic one. So I don't see any other questions, right? Should we move to the next one? And we can jump back if anybody has like. I just unmute myself. The next one, signature statements. Again, Brittany already introduced this one. We know signature statements are an integral component of rare book cataloging. And as Brittany was mentioning, currently signatures are being recorded on a MARC 500 field. So this is kind of like on the manifestation level. However, there are many instances where institutions might record different signature statements in the same BIP record because they belong to different states. And we can see examples of these, including $5 with institutional codes. So we have been thinking about gathering the community opinion on whether it makes sense to have the signature statement at the item level to reflect these different statements of the same edition. And what do you guys think?
We have a couple comments already. Catherine Chandler says yes, and Ryan Hildebrand says yes, ideal copy and item in hand, and that has gotten some support. So if anyone wants to elaborate on what they've said in Slack, you can always feel free to unmute and jump on as well.
I'm loving that enthusiasm, by the way.
Laura Ackerman says instance equals manifestation in RDA, right? Not sure.
In some loose way, it does.
Yeah, I think in our case, when we're referring to manifestation, we mostly mean instance. We just have it's suffused our brain, the fervor, you know, even though we're writing this all in BibFrame, right? So sometimes it's hard to untangle.
I see that people are still typing, so I'm just going to like stop here for a minute and see what else comes.
Laura says she's not sure signature is an instance property.
Would you like to elaborate on that, Laura?
But yeah, I was just thinking, clarify where signature in a rare book sense, we're talking about how a book is composed, how the gatherings and the is how it was printed and folded and composed, as opposed to, we're not talking about like autographs and those types of signatures in a book in this case, in case there was any confusion about that.
Laura has added to the Slack that she does not wish to elaborate. She says she is in over her head already, but it is a physical characteristic.
Thank you. Fair enough. I thought that maybe this will help also. So there is, I'm going to put it on the chat, and if somebody else can also put it on Slack, that will be great. But looking at TCR-MR, for instance, the signatures are part of the note on extent of manifestation, which is an indicative that in this case, they are considered as part of the manifestation.
We have a few more comments. Catherine Chandler says, right, and as a medieval manuscripts person, we can also include quires, since in codicology, it's not termed signatures. And then Laura has commented, if differences in signatures don't cause a new manifestation or instance to be created, you don't need it at instance level. We don't have rules for BibFrame entities worked out, so I'm relying on RDA.
Yeah, I think this is something that really comes out of DCRM tradition. So yeah, it is not something that you'd find in RDA. So this is, you know, sort of the added stuff that we do in rare books cataloging that is not required. It is not required, but pretty standard and widely adopted, I guess.
Ryan, sorry, go ahead, Zoe.
No, I was going to say something that Ryan previously said. So yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it depends if you're talking about an ideal copy, the signatures of the ideal copy would reflect the manifestation, but there are often variations due to, you know, various travails that happen to books. So yeah, basically, if you see what Ryan said, instance level could confirm completeness of item in hand or what is missing, because again, they're often imperfect copies with like whole gatherings missing.
All right, at the moment, I don't see any more comments coming in. feel free to keep adding comments to the Slack, but perhaps we move to the next question.
Yeah, thanks. I also wanted to say that there's the form to provide feedback, so this is not the last opportunity for that, and we are really looking forward to receive feedback. So please. And I see Mara, there's a new one.
Just when I said that. So Allison Rich says, it seems to me that if you had two variants on one record and the signature statement was different, you would put that in the item. If it modeled the perfect copy, you would just leave it in the instance.
Generally speaking, I think yes. So having having a space to put it in those cases where the item did not exactly match, or you knew you were missing something, having that option in the item.
Ryan says, would still like a note or something to indicate conformity.
Yeah, luckily we have notes everywhere.
Yeah.
So
For those of you who love notes, you got it.
perhaps, can there be too many notes? Actually, might be an actual question. If you think there could be too many notes, please let us know.
I was pretty sure you were making a joke.
There's here it's the visualization of the modeling for signature statement. So again, our resource is an item that has a signature statement, and the signature statement has a value. This is going to be a literal, and then it has a description. So in this case, the note is just using a DC terms description, but it serves the purpose of the note.
Kate Bauer says, there can never be too many notes. I want 545. Brittany says, I personally don't think recreating the signature statement in the item is the best way to describe difference in the signatures, but I don't think that means it shouldn't be there in the profile.
Yeah, in some senses, it becomes cataloging policy almost, which, yeah, again, it's a whole nother can of worms, right? And hopefully with profiles can definitely help that along, but policies will still need to exist.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's part of what DCRMR does.
I just want to read out loud the comment that Barbara has put on Slack too. As a cataloger with 30 plus years under my belt, although not all of it in special collections, I'm mostly here for reassurance that linked data can accommodate comfortably rare books. So far, I'm not sad. Thank you so much for that.
Back on the signature statement, Catherine says, I always look for a collation in hand press era book records if they're done correctly. It seems that should be there for every instance of a book. And that has gotten some support.
So it seems like this is a hot topic. Maybe something that we could have a rare materials affinity group meeting specifically to discuss it, so that we can move to the next topic, but not forget about this. Okay, I see some thumbs up, so I will do that. So let me just go back here. So we were talking about signature statements, and now we're talking about pagination foliation. And ARM defines the pagination foliation class as the sequential numbering of individual leaves, plates, pages, or columns of a resource. The pagination foliation class is very flexible, and even though our current modeling has it as a literal value, it could become more granular by combining it with the BIBFRAME properties count and unit. A more granular modeling approach will require additional ordering properties such as precedes and follows, and it's probably going to be like more laborious and probably have more challenges than just figuring out how to order the different properties. So we just wanted to check with the community, is this path worth pursuing? Is there a use case for parsing out the counts of different units? And going back to our item, we have the extent, and thanks so much to the Library of Congress for updating the extent, the BIBFRAME extent property to take out the domain of manifest instance, and so that we can also use it at the item level. And here we have our pagination foliation, which is in ARM is defined as a class of extent. We have a value, and then we have the description. Should this, instead of a value, a literal value, where you just put a text string, be split up to be more granular on number of pages, or number of pages, and then what are you counting? Pages, number of plates, and where are you counting plates? Like, is there a use case for that level of granularity? Yes, Crystal? Let's see.
I can't really speak to BIBFRAME use cases, but I can say that in converting MARC records over to Wikidata, it's been really challenging to parse out 300 subfield A with different, like, you know, how many pages versus how many leaves versus how it can be ingested into Wikidata, because they care about units. So having those be like controlled would probably help with interoperability with other systems. That's all I can think of.
Oh, that's a great point.
Kate Bowers has suggested to find out if you have use cases. I can't emphasize enough analysis of current data. Maybe grab 300 fields and see.
Yeah, I guess I will just kind of piggyback on what Crystal said, in that I have also experienced trying to parse out extent fields for Wikidata, and it is very difficult. And it is something I worry about. It would be just as difficult for converting any type of information if we, you know, down the line thought about converting MARC to BibFrame, to the ARM ontology, it would be difficult to parse out. It would be less difficult to create. And with this, we're thinking about, if you think about every comma in a 300 subfield A, it would be parsing out into its own little chunk of it's this number of pages, this number of leaves of plates, whatever. And so I think there are obviously, I think, many examples of that in any catalog. The question is, does anybody actually care about the individual components of the extent? And we don't know. And the thing is, it can even be now hard to identify or prognosticate future use cases of that type of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, just to echo Zoe, and when I heard Crystal's comment, it made me really thoughtful. And I was thinking also about, well, I guess the relative ease of transferring that data depends on whether you're transferring it to a MARC or from a MARC record, or whether you're trying to get interoperability with other linked data platforms, because the answer is different in each of these cases, right? Potentially, anyway. We have a couple more comments. Barbara asks, is it something that could be made optional because it might not always be necessary? And Laura says, counts of units of dimensions. As someone who had to try to predict how much storage space would be needed for a scattered group of books, having the counts and the books and the book width dimension to compute over would have been fabulous. And that has gotten some support. Ryan asks, how might this relate to paginated and unpaginated sequences?
That's a great question. Will it be unpaginated like a type of unit?
That's where my mind first went.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's still so many control vocabularies that might need to be developed.
Ryan continues, would you break out each sequence as a unit?
We would probably have to do a lot of testing to figure out what makes the most sense. And here is again where the use cases will be very useful.
Part of me thinks if you broke out each sequence as a unit, then the order, having some sort of ordination of the sequences becomes more valuable, which is another layer of labor to add on to the process.
I just thought of a use case. I don't know how useful a use case it would be, but I don't know, let's say you wanted to analyze your entire rare book collection of I don't know, the ratio of numbered to unnumbered pages or something, in your collection or something like that, or over a time period, how many, just the ratio over a time period, or in your, 17th century books, how many books, are primarily unnumbered pages or something like that. Again, very niche. That's something I can think of right now. And that doesn't even involve, as Mara was saying, the ordering of the sequences. That just involves total counts. But I mean, as rare materials catalogers, we care about the ordering. So the ordering would have to be in there.
Barbara asks, in converting from, comments, in converting from MARC, there would also be the difficulty of legacy/local practice in terms of paginated, unpaginated, folded illustrations, maps, plates, etc., which touches on the specificity of local practices that Zoe discussed earlier. Ryan is pointing out that binders sequence things erratically. Yes, I think we all can think of examples for that. Okay, and then Allison Rich has posted an interesting sequence here. Allison, would you like to unmute and elaborate a bit on this?
I have a, what is it? 1665 Mexican imprint. It's spiritual exercises, and I have a preliminary section, and then each day has its own leaf foliation. So with the same count. So if something looks as similar as that, those commas become really important to be counted, you know, because it's identical.
Right.
So maybe that helps.
It seems like this is another topic that will require more more discussion. And Alison, thanks so much for sharing this specific use case. Just for be mindful of the time, I'm going to move forward to the next one. And it seems like we only have less than 15 minutes late, 16 minutes time. So I think that I'm going to like fly by the next one, and then so it was going to talk a little bit more about enclosures. We also have questions about measurement. So if there is interest, please share it on Slack, and we can have another of our rare materials affinity group sessions that just continues the discussion, because it's been so useful for us to hear from you guys, and how are you seeing that this can or cannot work. So the next one is going to be, our next question is the item history. Again, Brittany already talked about this, so I'm not going to get into much discussion, but the problem here with us is that the ARM custodial history ontology, which is from like the older version of ARM, is deprecated. So the vocabulary is there, and we could just be using it as control vocabulary of like the strings, but will it be interesting to take that vocabulary, evaluate it, see if we want to like maybe turn it into a control vocabulary of types of events, and if there are other events that should be there. I think Kate earlier was talking about like a different type of event that might be interesting to reflect here. So will there be interest in doing something like that? Or is there any other existing vocabulary for events that events within an item history that we are like unaware of? Absolutely. Thanks for asking that, Ryan. So I had it open because I knew somebody will ask, and I forgot then to share it. But here, and I'm going to put it also on the chat, there is.
I also put it in Slack.
Oh,
So
thank you so much.
this is the old custodial, yeah.
So here we have accession in, acquisition, request, claim of ownership, the accession, theft, transfer.
I think someone was accidentally unmuted and I muted them. Sorry if you were trying to talk. here. If you did want to ask a question, whoever unmuted, please raise your hand and we will unmute you.
And Christine just mentioned on the on Slack item history, it's complicated. It is very complicated.
And part of that comes from, when the ARM task force was working on this, we wanted to, a lot of this, as you'll see, as we've been talking, there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of options on how we could model this or implement it. And we recognize that this granularity is really not necessary for every library or every institution or every object we're cataloging. A lot of stuff doesn't really have a complicated item history, but for those that do, using all of the different properties and options might be able to give you a really rich item history for something that has been, centuries old and has had a lot of interesting owners or complicated ownership history used in different contexts. All of those things, it gives you the opportunity to record those. And again, in theory, query on those different elements, perhaps generate different types of reports or different user-facing outputs that kind of show that history. But not everybody needs to do that.
Ryan has commented, I note some overlap with CVRMC relationship designators for what it's worth.
Yeah, that's actually great to hear, because depending on the amount of overlap, it's possibly we could just, it stands for the Controlled Vocabulary for Rare Materials Cataloging. And they have a set of relationship designators. So actually that is very good to know, because we might be able to just direct folks to that instead, right? Instead of maybe trying to revive this other ontology of uncertain status.
So could I just remember on the Slack that there's another session starting pretty soon. So we have a little bit of time to talk about enclosures. So if you want to get that one.
Sure. I'm not super wedded to the enclosure discussion, but most of our issues were about, I think one that might resonate the most with folks is whether it would be useful to be able to describe enclosures on the instance level as well as the item, because in some cases, libraries will have collections of publishers' bindings, on certain editions that they're on the instance level, but they are, collected specifically for this instance level, aspect. So I was wondering if other folks had thoughts about whether you should be able to describe enclosures at the instance level as well. Maybe if you do that in your library currently, that would be nice to hear about. Yeah, Crystal.
Yeah, we have a specific collection that is about publishers' bindings. And so it's really important to our rare books curator to have those enclosures described, even if they're not item specific. Like if it's something that that was occurring at the instance level, like, oh, this was bound in this specific box with these specific methods, it's important to her to have that brought out. So we do that. I think it would be useful.
Okay, we have some comments. Barbara says for some things, yes. Ryan says, yes, there are often loads of variants within publishers' cloth, for example. And it looks like we have more comments coming.
Hi, this is Barbara. I was recently working on a collection of different editions of Sherlock Holmes items. And there was one where it was the same publisher. The color of the binding was the same. It was publisher bound, but the specific instances were differentiated by, in one case, the grain of the cloth was vertical, in one case it was horizontal. And that's how you could tell the difference between them. Isn't rare books fun?
Sasha Frizzell also comments, this would also probably be useful for artists' books as well. That's a good point.
Yeah, I'll just say that is a really good point about artist books. And yeah, I'm a bit embarrassed. I did not think of that. But I know that was kind of one of our, if not requested, I think one of the other use cases that we've been thinking about in the Rare Materials Affinity Group. And we've also been talking to the new affinity group that I'm a bit forgetting their name. It is like the Art and Design Affinity Group. Does that sound about right? It is a new affinity group within LD4, and I know on Friday, yes, LD4 Art and Design, thanks. And I think they will be having their affinity group meeting right after ours tomorrow. So just a little throwing a plug in there.
Right, we have some broad love for the for Barbara's "Isn't rare books fun?" comment, just resonating with a lot of people, unsurprisingly.
I just love that as the final quote. Unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes left.
We've just got a comment from Laura. I think clarification of the entity boundaries is needed here. Not sure who can give that, but I'm nervous about making too many physical item characteristics fit under the manifestation/instance boundary. We are imagining the same kinds of visibility constraints post BIBFRAME/RDA/linked data discovery, and it seems clear it's going to need to be different. Creating separate manifestations because of variations in binding, signature, etc., may not serve our users well. And that has some agreement.
Yeah, I think that even going back to Mark. I mean, that's the sort of the squishy area we've always had in rare books cataloging, where the concept of issues and states, where we do describe them all in a single manifestation, typically because the variations don't warrant a separate manifestation record. So yeah, that is a really good point. That yeah, we need to continue wrestling with that and see if the linked data world requires some tweaking. Well, we are just about at time. I think I am really thrilled about the level of feedback and participation we've gotten at this session. We begged for 90 minutes and got it. So thank you, organizers, for letting us have 90 minutes, because we also had a slight worry that, oh, but what if nobody says anything? Try that. And no, this has been a really great, engaging session, and we've gotten so much terrific feedback.
Thank you all so much for presenting today. This was such a rich conversation. We have a poster after this session and a break. So thank you again. We'll see you soon.